In the early 1500s, a man named Hernán Cortés set foot in the land that is now Mexico, and history would never be the same. Cortés, a relatively unknown Spanish nobleman at the time, would go on to lead one of the most dramatic and controversial conquests ever recorded. But how did he manage to bring down the mighty Aztec Empire, an empire filled with wealth, power, and warriors? It wasn't just his military skills or his small army that made this possible. Cortés had something more, an unshakable will and a daring strategy that involved playing his enemies against each other. He allied with local tribes who were oppressed by the Aztecs, using their knowledge and manpower to gain an edge. But his path was not straightforward. Betrayals, bloody battles, and the constant threat of defeat followed him everywhere. The fall of the Aztec Empire didn't happen by chance. Cortés faced powerful enemies both in the New World and within his own ranks. Defying orders from his superiors in Spain, he made bold decisions that many thought were reckless. Yet, these decisions led him to stand face to face with the Aztec Emperor, Moctezuma, and ultimately take control of the vast empire. So, who was Hernán Cortés? What drove him to become the man who brought down such a powerful civilization? Was it ambition, greed, or the thrill of conquest that made him act the way he did? To understand this, we must look at his early life and the forces that shaped his character. What made this man so determined, so relentless in his pursuit of power, that he forever altered the course of history? Early life. Hernán Cortés was born in 1485 in the small town of Medellín, which was then part of the Kingdom of Castile, now located in modern-day Badajoz, Spain. His father, Martín Cortés de Monroy, came from a respected but not wealthy family. Martín had served as an infantry captain. Hernán's mother was Catalina Pizarro Altamirano. Through her, Cortés was connected to Francisco Pizarro, the conqueror of the Inca Empire in present-day Peru. Hernán and Francisco were second cousins once removed. Another notable family connection on his father's side was Nicolás de Ovando, who became the third governor of Hispaniola, a key Spanish colony in the Caribbean. Cortés came from a family with noble roots but limited financial resources. His great-grandfather, Rodrigo de Monroy y Almaraz, was the fifth Lord of Monroy. Despite the family's distinguished background, they didn't have much wealth, which meant that Hernán's parents hoped he would achieve a successful career that could elevate their standing. As a child, Cortés was often sick and pale, which worried his family. At the age of 14, they sent him to study Latin under his uncle in Salamanca. Though some later historians mistakenly believed he attended the prestigious University of Salamanca, Cortés' time there was more about private tutoring than formal university studies. After 2 years, Hernán returned to his hometown of Medellín. His parents were not happy about this decision since they had hoped he would pursue a legal career. Nevertheless, his time studying Latin and later working as a notary in Valladolid and Hispaniola proved useful. He gained a solid understanding of the legal codes of Castile, which he would later use to justify his actions during the conquest of Mexico. By the age of 16, Cortés was described as restless, ambitious, and even a bit arrogant. His small-town life no longer satisfied him, and he became captivated by the news from Spain's recent explorations in the New World, especially the discoveries of Christopher Columbus. This new world offered limitless possibilities, and Cortés felt the pull of adventure and opportunity. Early career in the New World. Plans were made for Hernán Cortés to sail to the Americas with Nicolás de Ovando, a family friend and the new governor of Hispaniola, an island that is now shared by Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Unfortunately, Cortés suffered an injury that prevented him from traveling at that time. Instead, he spent the next year wandering around Spain, likely staying in southern ports like Cadiz, Palos, Sanlúcar, and Seville. Finally, in 1504, Cortés set sail for Hispaniola. He traveled on a ship captained by Alonso Quintero, who had his own agenda and tried to deceive his superiors to reach the New World before them. Quintero's rebellious behavior may have influenced Cortés in his later actions. When Cortés arrived in Santo Domingo, the capital of Hispaniola, he was just 18 years old. He registered as a citizen, which entitled him to a plot of land and the right to farm. Shortly after, Governor Ovando granted him an encomienda, a system that allowed him to control a group of indigenous people and their labor. Additionally, he was appointed as a notary in the town of Azua de Compostela. Over the next 5 years, Cortés began to establish himself in the colony. In 1506, he took part in the conquests of both Hispaniola and Cuba. His leadership in these expeditions earned him a significant estate and a number of Taino slaves as rewards for his contributions. This period marked the beginning of Cortés's rise to power in the New World. Cuba, 1511 to 1519. In 1511, Hernán Cortés joined Diego Velázquez de Cuellar, an aide to the governor of Hispaniola, on an expedition to conquer Cuba. By this time, Velázquez had been appointed governor of New Spain. At just 26 years old, Cortés took on the role of clerk to the treasurer, which meant he was responsible for making sure the crown received its share, known as the quinto, which was 1/5 of the profits from the expedition. Impressed by Cortés's abilities, Velázquez secured a prominent political position for him in the colony. Cortés became the secretary for Velázquez and was appointed as the municipal magistrate, alcalde, of Santiago twice. While in Cuba, he gained significant wealth and status, owning an encomienda that provided him with Indian labor for his mines and cattle. His newfound power made him a key figure in the colony, and in 1514, he led a group that requested more Indians be assigned to the settlers. However, as time passed, tensions began to rise between Cortés and Governor Velázquez. Cortés also developed a romantic relationship with Catalina Suárez, the sister-in-law of Velázquez. This relationship further strained their connection, as Velázquez suspected Cortés of flirting with Catalina. Eventually, under pressure from Velázquez, Cortés married Catalina, hoping to win favor with both her family and the governor. After almost 15 years in the Indies, Cortés started to think about opportunities beyond his position as mayor of Cuba. He missed the first 2 expeditions to Mexico led by Francisco Hernández de Córdoba and Juan de Grijalva in 1518. When news reached Velázquez that Grijalva had found a promising site on the mainland rich in silver and gold, he decided to send reinforcements. In October 1518, Cortés was appointed captain general of this new expedition, but he was warned to act quickly before Velázquez changed his mind. Using his skills as an administrator and his knowledge from previous expeditions, Cortés managed to gather 6 ships and 300 men within a month. However, Velázquez, feeling jealous, tried to take control of the expedition, but Cortés was quick to recruit more men and ships from other Cuban ports. Conquest of Mexico, 1519 to 1521. In 1518, Diego Velázquez put Hernán Cortés in charge of an expedition to explore and secure the interior of Mexico for colonization. However, at the last moment, due to their ongoing disputes, Velázquez changed his mind and revoked Cortés's charter. Ignoring the orders, Cortés decided to go anyway in February 1519. He stopped in Trinidad, Cuba, to hire more soldiers and gather horses for the journey. Cortés set sail with about 11 ships, 500 men, including seasoned slaves, 13 horses, and a few cannons. He landed on the Yucatan Peninsula, which was part of the Maya territory. There, he met Jerónimo de Aguilar, a Spanish Franciscan priest who had survived a shipwreck and spent time in captivity with the Maya. Aguilar had learned the Contal Maya language and could translate for Cortés. Though Cortés had little military experience, he proved to be an effective leader. He won early victories over the coastal Indians and, in March 1519, formally claimed the land for the Spanish crown. He then moved on to Tabasco, where he faced resistance but emerged victorious. After the battle, he received 20 young indigenous women from the defeated natives and converted them to Christianity. Among these women was La Malinche, who would become his mistress and the mother of his son, Martín. Malinche spoke both Nahuatl and Contal Maya, which allowed her to help Cortés communicate with the Aztecs through Aguilar. On Easter Sunday 1519, Cortés met with governors Tendile and Petalpatoc of the Aztec Empire at San Juan de Ulúa. In July 1519, Cortés and his men took over Veracruz, directly challenging the authority of the governor of Cuba and placing themselves under the orders of King Charles. To prevent any thoughts of retreat, Cortés ordered his men to scuttle their ships, making it impossible for them to go back. March on Tenochtitlan. In Veracruz, Hernán Cortés met some of the tributaries of the Aztec Empire and asked them to set up a meeting with Moctezuma II, the ruler of the Aztecs. Moctezuma repeatedly refused, but Cortés was determined to meet him. Leaving 100 men in Veracruz, he marched toward Tenochtitlan in mid-August 1519 with 600 soldiers, 15 horsemen, 15 cannons, and many indigenous carriers and warriors. On the way to Tenochtitlan, Cortés formed alliances with various indigenous groups, including the Totonacs of Sempoala and the Nahua of Tlaxcala. However, the Otomis and Tlaxcalans initially clashed with the Spanish in 3 battles from September 2 to 5, 1519. During this time, Cortés continued to release prisoners with messages of peace. Eventually, the Tlaxcalan leaders, Xicotencatl the Elder and Maxixcoatzin, convinced their war leader, Xicotencatl the Younger, that it would be better to ally with Cortés than to kill him and his men. In October 1519, Cortés, along with about 1,000 Tlaxcalteca, marched to Cholula, the second largest city in central Mexico. Cortés, fearing potential treachery from the locals or wanting to instill fear in the Aztecs, ordered a massacre of thousands of unarmed nobles gathered in the central plaza, then partially burned the city. When Cortés arrived in Tenochtitlan on November 8, 1519, he was welcomed peacefully by Moctezuma II. The Aztec ruler hoped to learn the Spaniards' weaknesses and plan a future attack. Moctezuma showered the Spaniards with gifts of gold, which only fueled their greed. Cortés claimed in his letters to King Charles that the Aztecs believed he was either a messenger or the god Quetzalcoatl himself, although this idea is debated by some modern historians. Soon after, Cortés discovered that some Spaniards had been killed by the Aztecs while supporting the Totonacs. To maintain control, he took Moctezuma hostage in his own palace, effectively ruling Tenochtitlan through him. Meanwhile, Velázquez sent another expedition led by Pánfilo de Narváez to confront Cortés. Narváez arrived in Mexico in April 1520 with 1,100 men. Cortés left 200 soldiers in Tenochtitlan and took the rest to face Narváez. Despite being outnumbered, he defeated Narváez and convinced his soldiers to join him. In the absence of Cortés, one of his lieutenants, Pedro de Alvarado, committed a massacre in the Great Temple, which sparked a local rebellion. Cortés quickly returned to Tenochtitlan. On July 1, 1520, Moctezuma was killed. Spanish accounts say he was stoned by his own people, but some suggest that the Spaniards killed him when they realized he could not control the locals. Faced with rising hostility, Cortés decided to flee to Tlaxcala. During the Noche Triste, June 30 to July 1, 1520, the Spaniards made a narrow escape from Tenochtitlan across the Tlacopan Causeway, while their rear guard was attacked. Much of the treasure that Cortés had looted and his artillery were lost during this chaotic retreat. Destruction of Tenochtitlan. After a tough battle in Otumba, Cortés and his men made it to Tlaxcala, but they had lost 870 soldiers along the way. With the help of their allies, Cortés's forces finally gained strength when reinforcements arrived from Cuba. He started a strategy to weaken Tenochtitlan by cutting off their supplies and taking control of cities that supported the Aztecs. During the siege, Cortés built boats on the lake and gradually destroyed parts of the city to avoid fighting in close quarters. The Mexicas retreated to Tlatelolco and managed to ambush the Spanish, causing significant losses for them. Despite their efforts, Tlatelolco was the last part of the island that resisted the Spanish forces. The siege ended with the Spanish capturing Tenochtitlan and destroying the city. In January 1521, Cortés dealt with a plot against him led by Antonio de Villafana, who was executed for his role in the conspiracy. The Aztec Empire fell when Cuauhtémoc, the ruler of Tenochtitlan, was captured on August 13, 1521. Cortés claimed the territory for Spain, renaming the city Mexico City. From 1521 to 1524, Cortés governed Mexico. After being appointed as the governor of Mexico, Cortés faced many challenges. Historical accounts suggest he felt he was treated unfairly by the Spanish crown, despite his significant achievements. Cortés often complained about not receiving enough rewards for his work in establishing New Spain. He was not afraid to express his dissatisfaction in a letter to King Charles on October 15, 1524, where he claimed that the conquest of Mexico was solely due to him. King Charles appointed Cortés as governor and captain general of New Spain. However, four royal officials were also sent to help him govern, which limited his power and made him feel closely monitored. Cortés began the construction of Mexico City by destroying Aztec temples and buildings and rebuilding on their ruins, turning it into a major European city in the Americas. Cortés founded new cities and appointed officials to help extend Spanish control throughout New Spain. He implemented the encomienda system in 1524, which allowed him to claim rewards for his achievements. However, newcomers and those against Cortés complained about favoritism, believing they were being left out. In 1523, the crown sent a military force led by Francisco de Garay to settle the northern part of Mexico, which frustrated Cortés. He believed this was part of a conspiracy against him by his rivals, including Diego Velázquez de Cuellar and Bishop Fonseca. Cortés appealed to the king, who issued a decree preventing Garay from interfering in New Spain, forcing Garay to back down without a fight. Royal Grant of Arms, 1525. Even though Cortés had ignored Diego Velázquez's authority when he sailed to the mainland and led a conquest expedition, the Spanish crown rewarded his incredible success with a coat of arms. This was a prestigious honor that Cortés requested. The official document granting the coat of arms highlights his achievements during the conquest of Mexico. The king's proclamation includes this statement: "We recognize the many efforts, dangers, and adventures you faced, as noted above. To ensure that your services are remembered forever and to honor you and your descendants more fully, we decree that, in addition to your existing family coat of arms, you will also have a new coat of arms that is recognized and acknowledged." The document describes the coat of arms in detail, which is divided into 4 sections. The top part features a black eagle with 2 heads on a white background, symbolizing the empire. Below that is a golden lion on a red background, representing Cortés's hard work and efforts in the conquest. 2 other sections are directly related to Mexico. One shows 3 crowns, symbolizing the 3 Aztec emperors during the conquest: Moctezuma, Cuitlahuac, and Cuauhtémoc. The other section depicts Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital. Surrounding the central shield are symbols representing the 7 city-states around the lake that Cortés defeated. The lords of these city-states are depicted as prisoners, bound in chains that are locked beneath the shield. Death of his first wife and remarriage. Cortés's wife, Catalina Suárez, arrived in New Spain during the summer of 1522 with her sister and brother. Their marriage was quite awkward because Catalina was related to Diego Velázquez, the governor of Cuba, whose authority Cortés had rejected, making him an enemy. Catalina did not have the noble title of Dona, which meant that her marriage to Cortés did not improve his social status. The couple had no children together, but Cortés had fathered children with various indigenous women, including a son born around 1522 with his translator, Dona Marina. This son was named Martín Cortés after Cortés's father and was often called El Mestizo. Catalina Suárez died under unclear circumstances on the night of November 1 to 2, 1522. There were accusations that Cortés had murdered her, leading to an investigation. Many people from their household were questioned about her death. This investigation was documented and later published in the 19th century, with records discovered in the 20th century. The scandal surrounding Catalina's death allowed Cortés to marry someone of higher social status suitable for his wealth and power. In 1526, Cortés built a grand house for himself, called the Palace of Cortés, in Cuernavaca, close to the capital where he owned large encomienda holdings. By 1529, he received the noble title of Don and became the Marquis of the Valley of Oaxaca. He then married the Spanish noblewoman Dona Juana de Zúñiga, and they had 3 children, including another son also named Martín. This son, Don Martín Cortés y Zúñiga, became Cortés's legitimate heir, inheriting the title and estate of the Marquisate of the Valley of Oaxaca. Cortés's legitimate daughters were Dona María, Dona Catalina, and Dona Juana. Cortés and the spiritual conquest of Mexico. Converting indigenous peoples to Christianity was a crucial part of expanding Spanish power. After completing the military conquest, Cortés knew it was important to arrange for their conversion. During the Age of Discovery, the Catholic Church had seen earlier efforts to convert people in the Caribbean, mainly by Spanish friars. Cortés asked the Spanish king to send Franciscan and Dominican friars to Mexico to convert the large indigenous populations. In his fourth letter to the king, he argued that friars were better suited for this task than regular priests because he believed regular priests could harm the Indians' conversion. Cortés explained that if the Indians saw church leaders indulging in the vices common in Spain, it would hurt their faith, and any further preaching would be ineffective. He wanted the mendicant friars to be the main evangelists. However, these friars did not usually have the full powers needed to perform all the sacraments for converting the Indians. To solve this, Cortés suggested that the king ask the Pope to grant these powers to the main leaders of the religious orders that would come to Mexico. He believed it was vital for the Pope to be generous because the lands were far from Rome, and Christians living there needed proper support to address their sins. The Franciscans arrived in May 1524, a significant group of 12 known as the 12 Apostles of Mexico, led by Fray Martín de Valencia. Franciscan Jerónimo de Mendieta claimed that Cortés's most important act was how he welcomed the first group of Franciscans. According to the story, Cortés met the friars as they approached the capital, kneeling before them as they came from the coast. This story was shared by the Franciscans to show Cortés's humility and devotion, sending a powerful message that his earthly power was secondary to the spiritual power of the friars. However, one of the first Franciscans, Fray Toribio de Benavente Motolinía, did not mention this in his history. Cortés and the Franciscans had a strong partnership in Mexico, with them viewing him as the new Moses for opening the land to Christian evangelization. In a 1555 response to Dominican Bartolomé de las Casas, Motolinía praised Cortés, saying that despite his human flaws, he was a faithful Christian who wanted to use his life and wealth to spread the teachings of Jesus and die for the conversion of the indigenous peoples. Motolinía asked who had defended the Indians in the New World better than Cortés, saying that through him, God allowed the preaching of the gospel and helped the Indians respect church ministers. In Fray Bernardino de Sahagun's 1585 revision of the conquest narrative found in Book 12 of the Florentine Codex, he added positive references to Cortés that were not in earlier texts. While the original Book 12 focused on the search for gold, Sahagun's revised version ends with praise for Cortés for requesting the Franciscans' arrival in Mexico to convert the Indians. Expedition to Honduras and Aftermath, 1524 to 1541. From 1524 to 1526, Cortés led an expedition to Honduras, where he defeated Cristobal de Olid, who had claimed the area for himself with the support of Diego Velázquez, the governor of Cuba. Cortés feared that Cuauhtémoc might start a rebellion in Mexico, so he took him along on the trip to Honduras. However, in a controversial decision, Cuauhtémoc was executed during the journey. Angered by Olid's betrayal, Cortés ordered the arrest of Velázquez, whom he believed was behind Olid's actions. This move only created more tension with the Crown of Castile and the Council of Indies, who were already worried about Cortés's growing power. In his fifth letter to King Charles, Cortés tried to explain his actions and criticized his various and powerful rivals and enemies who he believed had misled the king. Charles, who was also the Holy Roman Emperor, was mainly focused on wars in Europe and paid little attention to faraway colonies unless they helped fund his battles. In 1521, during the time of the conquest, Charles was dealing with issues in Germany, and Bishop Adrian of Utrecht was acting as regent in Spain. Velázquez and Bishop Juan Rodríguez de Fonseca convinced the regent to appoint a commissioner named Luis Ponce de Leon to investigate Cortés's actions and even have him arrested. Cortés once said that it was harder to fight against his own countrymen than against the Aztecs. Velázquez continued to create problems for him, working with Fonseca to undermine Cortés in the Council of the Indies. A few days after Cortés returned from his expedition, Ponce de Leon suspended him from being governor of New Spain. Ponce de Leon soon fell ill and died after arriving, and he appointed Marcos de Aguilar as the new alcalde mayor. However, Aguilar also became sick and named Alonso de Estrada as governor, who received confirmation of his role through a royal decree in August 1527. Cortés was suspected of poisoning both men but did not take over the government. Estrada sent Diego de Figueroa to the south, where he raided graveyards and extorted money, but he met his end when the ship carrying the stolen treasures sank. Albornoz convinced Estrada to release Gonzalo de Salazar and Chirinos. After Cortés angrily complained about one of his supporters losing a hand, Estrada exiled him. In 1528, Cortés sailed back to Spain to appeal to King Charles. First returned to Spain, 1528, and Marquisate of the Valley of Oaxaca. In 1528, Cortés returned to Spain to seek justice from King Charles V. While he was away, Juan Altamirano and Alonso Valiente represented him in Mexico. Cortés arrived at Charles V's court in a grand manner and directly addressed the accusations made against him. He denied that he had withheld any gold from the crown, proving that he had contributed more than the required 1/5. He also mentioned that he had spent a lot of money to build Mexico City on the ruins of the Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan, which had been destroyed during the siege that ended the Aztec Empire. Charles received Cortés with great honor and awarded him the Order of Santiago. In recognition of his contributions to expanding the Spanish Empire, Cortés was given the noble title of Don in 1529 and named the Marqués del Valle de Oaxaca, Marquis of the Valley of Oaxaca. He also married Dona Juana Zúñiga, a Spanish noblewoman, after his first wife, Catalina Suárez, passed away in 1522. The title and estate of the Marquesado were passed down to his descendants until 1811. The Oaxaca Valley was one of the richest areas in New Spain, and Cortés had 23,000 vassals across 23 named encomiendas that were granted to him for life. Although his land holdings and vassals were confirmed, he was not reinstated as governor and never held any significant position in the New Spain administration again. During his time in Spain, his properties were poorly managed by corrupt colonial officials. Cortés supported the local natives in a lawsuit against these abuses, which were documented in the Huexinco Codex. When Cortés died in 1547, the estate and title went to his legitimate son, Don Martín Cortés, who became the second Marquess. However, Don Martín's involvement in the Encomenderos conspiracy threatened the family's holdings, but they were eventually restored and continued to benefit Hernán Cortés's family for generations. Return to Mexico, 1530, and appointment of a viceroy, 1535. Cortés returned to Mexico in 1530 with new titles and honors. Even though he still had military power and permission to continue his conquests, Don Antonio de Mendoza was appointed viceroy in 1535 to handle civil affairs in New Spain. This split in authority caused ongoing conflict and led to the failure of several of Cortés's plans. When he got back to Mexico, Cortés found the country in chaos and people at court suspected he might start a rebellion. After re-establishing his authority and bringing some order, Cortés retired to his estates in Cuernavaca, about 30 miles 48 kilometers south of Mexico City. There, he focused on building his palace and looking into Pacific exploration. He stayed in Mexico from 1530 to 1541 and had arguments with Nuno Beltrán de Guzmán and fought over the right to explore what is now California with Antonio de Mendoza, the first viceroy. In 1534, Cortés acquired several silver mines in Zumpango del Rio. By the early 1540s, he owned 20 silver mines in Sultepec, 12 in Tasca, and 3 in Zacualpan. He had previously claimed silver in the Tamazula area. In 1536, Cortés looked into the northwestern part of Mexico and found the Baja California Peninsula. He also spent time along the Pacific coast of Mexico. The Gulf of California was named the Sea of Cortés by its discoverer, Francisco de Aloa, in 1539. This was the last major expedition Cortés undertook. Later life and death. After exploring Baja California, Cortés returned to Spain in 1541, hoping to address the many lawsuits against him for debts and abuse of power. When he arrived, he faced a crowd to speak to the emperor. Cortés told him, "I am a man who has given you more provinces than your ancestors left you cities." The emperor eventually allowed Cortés to join him and his fleet, led by Andrea Doria, on a major expedition against Algiers in 1541. At that time, Algiers was part of the Ottoman Empire. During this campaign, Cortés nearly drowned in a storm that struck his fleet while he was chasing the Pasha of Algiers. Cortés had spent a lot of his own money on his expeditions and was now heavily in debt. In February 1544, he made a claim on the royal treasury, but for 3 years, no one paid him any attention. Frustrated, he decided to return to Mexico in 1547. However, when he reached Seville, he became ill with dysentery and died in Castilleja de la Cuesta, Seville, on December 2, 1547, from pleurisy at the age of 62. In his will, Cortés made sure his many mestizo and white children, as well as their mothers, were well taken care of. He requested that his remains be buried in Mexico. Before he died, he asked the Pope to remove the natural status of 4 of his children, which made them legitimate in the eyes of the Church. One of them was Martín, whom he had with Dona Marina, also known as La Malinche, who was said to be his favorite. Sadly, his daughter Dona Catalina died shortly after his passing. After his death, Cortés's body was moved more than 8 times for various reasons. On December 4, 1547, he was buried in the mausoleum of the Duke of Medina at the Church of San Isidoro del Campo in Seville. 3 years later, in 1550, he was moved to a different spot in the same church. In his will, Cortés asked to be buried in a monastery he had planned to build in Coyoacán, Mexico, but that monastery was never constructed. So, in 1566, his body was sent to New Spain and buried in the Church of San Francisco de Texcoco, where his mother and one sister were laid to rest. In 1629, Cortés's last male descendant, Don Pedro Cortés, the 4th Marqués del Valle, died. The viceroy decided to move Cortés's bones along with those of his descendant to a Franciscan church in Mexico. This transfer was delayed for 9 years while Cortés's body remained in the main room of the viceroy's palace. Eventually, his remains were moved to the Sagrario of the Franciscan church, where they stayed for 87 years. In 1716, his body was relocated again within the same church. In 1794, Cortés's remains were moved to the Hospital de Jesus, which he founded in Mexico City, where a statue and a mausoleum were created. A public ceremony was held, and all the churches in the city rang their bells to mark the occasion. After Mexico's independence in 1823, there were concerns that his remains might be desecrated, so the mausoleum was removed. The statue and coat of arms were sent to Palermo, Sicily, for safekeeping, while his bones were hidden, leading people to believe they had been taken out of Mexico. In 1836, his bones were moved again within the same building. It was not until November 24, 1946, that Cortés's remains were rediscovered, thanks to a secret document found by Lucas Alaman. The remains were handed over to the Instituto Nacional de Antropología y Historia, INH, where they were authenticated. The bones were then restored to their place with a bronze inscription and his coat of arms. When the bones were rediscovered, supporters of Hispanic tradition in Mexico were excited. However, one supporter of an indigenous perspective suggested publicly burning the remains in front of the statue of Cuauhtémoc and scattering the ashes. After the rediscovery and authentication of Cortés's remains, bones identified as Cuauhtémoc's were found, leading to a Battle of the Bones. On December 16, 1560, the lawsuits related to the vassals of the Cortés estate were resolved by a royal order issued by Philip II. Disputed interpretation of his life. Hernán Cortés's early life has few known details. His fame came from conquering Mexico, which led to more interest in his story. The best source about him is his letters to the king, written during his campaign in Mexico. These letters aim to present his actions positively, so they should be read with a critical eye. Another important source is the biography by Cortés's chaplain, López de Gómara. This book was written in Spain several years after the conquest. Gómara had never visited the Americas and relied on Cortés's accounts, blending them with romantic tales. Bernal Díaz del Castillo, a fellow conquistador, wrote an eyewitness account in response to Gómara's romanticized version. Díaz's account does not portray Cortés as a hero but emphasizes the contributions of his soldiers. In the years after the conquest, more critical views emerged. The Dominican friar Bartolomé de las Casas wrote a short account of the destruction of the Indies, accusing the conquistadors, including Cortés, of violence against the indigenous people. The Florentine Codex, by Franciscan Bernardino de Sahagun, also criticizes Cortés. Due to the limited sources, opinions about Cortés are divided, with some viewing him as ruthless and others as honorable. In Mexico, there are few public representations of Cortés. Many places are named after him, such as the Palacio de Cortés in Cuernavaca and the Paso de Cortés, a mountain pass between two volcanoes. Muralist Diego Rivera depicted him as a powerful figure alongside Malinche in a well-known mural in Mexico City. In 1981, President López Portillo aimed to increase public recognition of Cortés by unveiling a bust created by Manuel Tolsa at the Hospital de Jesus Nazareno. However, nationalist protests led to its removal from public view. Today, the bust remains at the hospital, while the original is in Naples, Italy. Another monument, called Monumento al Mestizaje, was commissioned by President Portillo to honor Cortés, Malinche, and their son Martín. This statue was initially placed in Coyoacan's main square but had to be moved to a lesser-known park due to protests. A different statue by Sebastián Aparicio, located in Cuernavaca, was less recognizable and sparked little interest. It was eventually removed when the hotel it was in was converted into a commercial center. Thanks for watching. Until next time.